All right, good morning, everybody. This morning we're going to be talking about basically the same stuff we were talking about yesterday because we got some overlap in the news cycle. Developments in both sides, and yeah, so we'll be talking a little bit about Epstein stuff, but not very much, and then quite a bit about the election stuff that's going on, most especially with regards to Trump being removed from ballots and what that actually means. So buckle up. And good morning, everybody. I see Pitt Danny's got first blood this morning. So, like I said, there's a lot of stuff to talk about, and I want to dig in this morning on the removal of Donald Trump from various ballots, and kind of what that means. But first, I want to give a quick update because we talked about the Epstein client list yesterday, and I detailed, a little cold water on the list because what we're talking about there is not a list of Epstein's clients, it's a list of Epstein associates. And yesterday after our show, there was confirmation released through various court documents and evidence that the John Doe number 36 in the client list in the court proceedings does refer to Bill Clinton, and he's by far the most mentioned of the John Does in the proceedings. But there's this Jane Doe 107 now, on whose petition the court has ordered that the release of the client of the associates list be delayed pending her being given time, a deadline of January 22nd, to produce evidence to support the continued suppression of the associates list. Now, like I said yesterday, the associates list is a list of associates, not clients, which is not to say that the people on the associates list are not necessarily clients, but Clinton is a great example. If we were to see an actual docket, an actual receipt book that listed services rendered, the actual client list where, person A purchased this depraved service, engaged in this illegal activity, paid for the provision of sexual slave from Jeffrey Epstein, dates and times, and the whole thing. It was just, who had sex with whom, how and why and when and for how much money, and the tapes and everything. That would be one thing. But that would be a clear indictment of the activities of the individuals. We're not going to see that. Instead, we get this associates list. Just because Bill Clinton is likely to be one of the names on the client list that paid money for access to depraved activities does not mean that his inclusion on the list of associates is itself damning, because the list of associates is going to be anything from, who cleaned Epstein's houses, and those people should also be interrogated, by the way, because they saw things, to, whose political fundraising campaigns did Jeffrey Epstein attend? And again, that there's an association between the two should be sufficient to begin some sort of an investigation into the extent and nature of that association. Because like I talked about yesterday, just like in the world of high art, when you start talking about people moving around in the big money circles up there, it's all about moving money. It's all about money laundering and making things appear a certain way. A great example, take the two disparate cases of Sam Bankman-Fried and, Dinesh D'Souza. So Sam Bankman-Fried, Bitcoin billionaire, defrauded hundreds of clients out of billions of dollars. It was just released day before yesterday. A news article was released essentially that despite all of the evidence and all of the controversy that surrounded Bankman-Fried's arrest last year, Bankman-Fried just made a $100 million donation to some surrogate of the Democrat National Committee. Just basically donated $100 million to Democrats, and all of a sudden they're dropping all the charges. So Bankman-Fried they're just going to let him go. Where, quite by contrast, many years ago, Dinesh D'Souza, who you all probably have at least heard of, as a filmmaker. He did the Mules film and all that. He's done several. He makes documentaries, pro-American documentaries. Dinesh D'Souza was incarcerated. He spent I don't know how long, like a year and a half or something. It wasn't an extraordinarily long period, but it was an extraordinarily long period considering the charges. What Dinesh did, and he very plainly admits that he did it and he didn't think it was a big deal. And there's a reason he didn't think it was a big deal. I'll get back to that in just a second. But what he did is he made a $10,000 donation to a political campaign. And then he paid back one of his friends who also made a $10,000 contribution to the same campaign. And so what he was incarcerated for was campaign fraud, campaign finance fraud, or campaign finance rules violations. And the thing of that is it's something that we know happens all the time. It's not done cleverly or covertly or carefully. It's something that's done very much out in the open. And it's quite clear, like it's painfully clear in the case of D'Souza, that he was targeted for political reasons by a politically motivated Justice Department. While at the same, well, not at the same time, but now we see the case of Bankman-Fried, and the fact is simply this: there are two standards. There are at least two, more like three standards of justice. If you are one of the special people, then your crimes aren't crimes. So I'm talking about this part of it this morning because part of what I want to discuss as we get into the ballot questions is the idea of the legitimacy of government. The government of the United States of America is described and constructed by the Constitution of the United States. The rules put forward, the powers enumerated in the Constitution of the United States of America, are those rules not only by which the government is meant to operate, but, and remember, we're talking about a set of rules that was put forward by people who threw off the shackles of a government whose legitimacy came into question through its abuse and overreach. The operation of the government within the confines of the Constitution, within accordance to the Constitution, is its legitimacy. We're all born with a Social Security number and presupposed to have signed the contract, the social contract. We have agreed. We have consented to be governed by the mere fact of our birth as citizens of this nation. But that contract, like all contracts, is not one-sided. I consent to be governed by a legitimate American government constituted, constructed by the United States Constitution, which very clearly details the composition and conduct of the American government. Take, for example, what's happening in Texas right now. We are under attack. We are being invaded by hostile foreign entities. And not only is our federal government not stepping in to fulfill its obligations under Section 4 of Article 4. Article 4, Section 4 details the responsibility of the government to secure our borders from hostile invaders. But not only is the federal government not fulfilling their obligation there, and they are in fact moving legally and physically. So we've seen the videos of feds going down to the border and raising fences with bulldozers in order to let these hostile foreign invaders crawl under the fence and enter the country illegally. But we're also seeing the administration filing lawsuits against Texas, ordering Texas to cease and desist in the enforcement of law. So what you're seeing there, Tim Pool talked about this the other day a bit, actually. What you're seeing there is the federal government aiding and abetting the commission of crime. You're seeing our own federal government not only failing to secure that border, but actively working with the enemies, providing aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States of America, to hostile foreign invaders. You're seeing the federal government itself acting treasonously, right? You see things like the McMichaels case where, you might even think that what the McMichaels did was wrong, vis-a-vis the Ahmaud Arbery case. But what you cannot ignore, no matter what your opinion of what happened there was, what you cannot intelligently ignore is that in the McMichaels case, what happened is the prosecutor reviewed the evidence, said this is a clear-cut case of self-defense that occurred within the context of off-duty law enforcement officers attempting to effect a citizen's arrest lawfully, and there is no crime to be charged here. But then he was harassed by terrorists, by Black Lives Matter terrorists, until he recused himself, withdrew his ruling. Now, understand, by the time those terrorists began to harass that prosecutor, the legal determination had been made, and it had been made clearly within the confines of the law. And those terrorists went on, as 3 or 4 more prosecutors came to the same conclusion, continued to terrorize and threaten these prosecutors until they found one way the hell out of the jurisdiction where the event occurred, who said, yeah, sure. A black woman from the, the AKA sorority, who said, hell yeah, I'll hang a white man for you. And so what you see there is the standard of justice has just been eliminated. It doesn't exist. There is no, in this country today, right, the Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin's lawyers moved for a change of venue and were told no. Their argument was that because of the high-profile nature of the case, the what's his face? The George Floyd, St. George of fentanyl. Because of the high-profile nature of the case, that Chauvin could not expect a fair trial in that jurisdiction, and the judge denied the motion. And the judge's reason for denying the motion was the case is so high profile that he can't get a fair trial in any jurisdiction in this country. It ain't complicated. If he can't get a fair trial to which he has a right, then there's no trial. You're done. That's it. There's no trial. But that's not the way they did it. That is absolutely the way it would have gone if just the color palette had been reversed. And I don't have to speculate on that because there was no trial, not even an argument about trial, in the case of the black Capitol Police officer that murdered Ashley Babbitt on January 6th. Black Capitol Police officer who murdered a white Trump supporter in cold blood, not even an investigation. No, that guy got to go on TV and be lauded as a hero. So, the Donald has been removed kind of symbolically from the ballot in Colorado and Maine thus far. Now, there's several other states, not least of which Arizona and California, have made overtures in that direction. I think California has already backed off entirely from it, but they were bandying it about. But it's Colorado and Maine that have actually removed Trump from the ballot. There's a problem. I want to take you back to 1860, when Abraham Lincoln won the election without a single vote from those southern states which eventually seceded. Now, there are people talking about it online that was the last time that states removed a president from the ballot. That's not entirely accurate. But what happened then is similar to some stuff quite separately from the removal from the ballot that's happening here. So back then, the way it worked is you went to vote, you showed up, and you wrote down everybody was a write-in. So if you didn't know who was running, you just wrote down Joe Smith, whatever. And so in order to get people to write in the right names, what would happen is the individual parties would issue ballots. They would distribute ballots, right? So the Republican Party would give you basically a list. Hey, these are the people we want you to vote for. And the Democrat Party would go around and give people a list, a playbill sort of a list. These are the people we want you to vote for. What happened in 1860 is people in the South were afraid to be seen in possession of a Republican ballot because people who were seen in a possession of a Republican ballot were harassed and assaulted and beaten and in a few cases murdered for having that ballot. So when they say that Lincoln was removed from the ballots in the southern states and that was a precursor to the Civil War, it is and is not correct, because frankly you're talking about a world where the vote was a very different creature. But essentially what happened there is terrorism, Democrat, no surprise, Democrat, pro-slavery terrorism prevented people from having ballot access. Literally, they couldn't get copies of nobody wanted to have the copies of the ballot for fear of physical assault and reprisal. Today, the idea of states individually removing people from the ballot, removing candidates from the ballot, is tantamount to the abolition of the vote. So even if the Supreme Court overturns everything, like I started to talk about a little bit yesterday, Joe Biden has set the standard. We don't care what the law is. We will extend the moratorium on evictions. Fuck the law. Fuck the law. We don't care what the law is. I'm going to do it anyway, and we're going to enjoy the benefits of breaking the law for as long as we can until the courts catch up to us and set it right. Until the courts step in and spank us for it. Well, so what happens when we get a little closer to the general election? There's only 2 names on the ballot. And a dozen Democrat states just say, you know what? We don't want Trump on the ballot. Only Joe gets to be on the ballot this year. They print the ballots. The Supreme Court is brought in, gets involved. And by the time the Supreme Court has made its ruling, the election has already happened. Joe Biden wins by default because Trump's been removed from the ballots, even though the Supreme Court comes in and says, you can't do that. You can't just remove him from the ballots. You know, I'll take you back to 2020. After the 2020 election, or before the 2020 election, lawsuits were filed because of concerns related to individual state elections where changes to the sorry about that. Challenges were issued, lawsuits were filed where in individual states, Georgia was one of them, Pennsylvania was one of them, there were several others, where changes had been made to the voting rules without the involvement of the individual states' legislatures, which is illegal. It's unconstitutional. And in each of the cases, if I remember correctly, it is unconstitutional under the federal Constitution, under the United States Constitution, and it also happened to be unconstitutional within the confines of the individual states' constitutions in each of those cases. And the courts dismissed those cases without hearing them, stating that the election hasn't happened yet. Therefore, the victim has not yet suffered the harm, and so you have no claim for cause of action because you still haven't suffered the harm. You can't file for damages. You can't sue for damages until you have actually suffered harm, actually suffered those damages, because we cannot consider how you should be made whole if you have not been yet made unwhole. So those cases were dismissed. After the election, the same cases were reintroduced, and they were dismissed. And I don't remember what the exact legal jargon was there. There was something, one ruling was about standing, one ruling was about latches. But after the election, many of the same cases, I think all of the same cases, were refiled now that the damage had actually occurred, and they were dismissed. And the reasoning there was, well, the election has already happened. We cannot change the result. We cannot correct the damages. The damages cannot be made whole by way of the lawsuit, ergo, no lawsuit. right? I remember talking about this on the show right after it all happened, and I said I'd like to send a petition to these judges and ask, hey, just so that we're ready, right, when 2024 comes around, can you show me the 37 and a half seconds, the 37 and a half second window in which these lawsuits can be filed? Because let me remind you, no Republican has won the presidency in your living memory without the DNC filing lawsuits to challenge that victory. Republicans generally don't do that. The Democrats have done it in literally every election for over 60 years. Literally every time a Republican wins, the Democrats file a lawsuit to challenge the results of the election. For 6 decades. So, you've heard the Democrats go on and on and on about, oh, well, these nut jobs keep denying the results of the 2020 election. I'm sorry. Or did you forget 2016? Did you forget Bush's election? Did you forget Reagan's election? Right? No. Fuck you. The Democrats cry foul every single time. But go back and look at the Democrats that have won. Honestly, I think Bill Clinton did win the election. Legitimately. Outside of his having been propped up and funded by foreign influence. Same thing with Barack Obama. I think he really did get the votes he got. Except that he was propped up and funded by foreign powers. I think Hillary Clinton absolutely got all the votes she got, and she was also propped up and funded by foreign powers. We're tired of their shit. And I pushed this to the end, but it's about time to wrap up. But I pushed this to the end on purpose. There is a ray of hope. The case brought by Jack Smith is likely to crumble under its own weight because reasonable and intelligent challenges are arising to not the legitimacy of Jack Smith's case, but the legitimacy of Jack Smith himself, because he was never actually appointed as the special counsel in which position he now purports to serve. He's not a legitimate special counsel. He's some random civilian that was identified and selected by Merrick Garland and sicked on the case. And is referred to as special counsel, but that's a very specific thing that requires congressional involvement, which never happened. So the Jack Smith case is probably going to fall flat on its face just because Jack Smith is not, technically, legally, Jack Smith bringing the indictment is legally no different than me, personally, bringing the indictment. He doesn't have the authority to do it. So that one's going to be fun. And then the other one, Fani Willis. Fani Willis's case hinges on the accusation that Donald Trump knowingly lied about the corruption in the 2020 election. Hinges on the assertion that Donald Trump insisted, even though he knew it to be untrue, that the Georgia election was unsecure and some shady shit happened. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the True the Vote defeats Fair Right, Stacey Abrams, Mark Elias, and the Biden Department of Justice in landmark election case in Georgia federal court. So, here's what happened. I'm going to summarize this for you so that you can understand how this case should shut down the Fani Willis case. So, like I just said, the Fani Willis case presupposes and hinges on the assertion that Donald Trump lied, knowingly and intentionally lied about votes being stolen specifically in Atlanta, Georgia. This case that was just resolved in favor of True the Vote began with True the Vote making maneuvers for inquiries into specific votes in Georgia. There were 300 and some thousand voters still registered in the state of Georgia, and I'm actually not entirely clear on whether it's 300,000 in the state of Georgia or 300,000 just in Fulton County, but 300,000 in the state of Georgia. Okay. 300,000 people, 300,000 registered votes in the state of Georgia who are identified as having moved out of state, registered as voters in other states, and therefore are not legitimate voters in the state of Georgia. And of those, some, I lost the number. I don't have the number in front of me now. I had the number in front of me a minute ago. Like a third of them voted, right? Now, we can't see who voted. Or rather, we can see who voted. We can't see who they voted for. But Trump lost Georgia, and given the time frame, given the timeline of events, he lost Georgia and thereby the entire general election in 2020 by a little over 11,000 votes. True the Vote had gone through legal channels to challenge the legitimacy of voters still on the roll as registered voters and have them removed to clean up the rolls, which periodically you're supposed to do. You're supposed to, each state is supposed to go through their rolls of registered voters and remove those voters who have died, who have moved out of state. That's basically like, those are the two things. You move out, or you die. Basically, you leave the state, you're done. You're not a voter here anymore. But some 70,000 or a shitload of them still voted in the election. That's enough right there. In an election that was decided by roughly 11,000 votes, more than 70,000 are confirmed, not theorized, guaranteed to have been fraudulent, to have been illegal votes, to have been cast by people who, no matter who they voted for, under the letter of the law, should be incarcerated right now for having illegally cast their votes. But like I've talked about many times on the show, and like David Schaefer discussed with us at the rally there, which is on camera. It's I think I published the video. I think I published that video only on Rumble. But as he described, essentially there's so much voter fraud in every election that because the courts cannot handle all of it, they choose to address none of it. And that's a problem. So we are quite seriously facing a situation. Now, this is all good news because Fani Willis's entire argument collapses if there is any evidence at all that any amount of voter fraud occurred in Georgia. If it can be said beyond the shadow of a doubt that a person in Georgia cast a vote incorrectly, that's it. Not even maliciously. Not even a lot of them. If it can be said without reasonable doubt that a person in the state of Georgia errantly cast a vote, then Fannie Willis's case is made in bad faith from the get-go. Not hard. So that's fantastic news. That there is one glaring, painfully obvious, serious vulnerability in the Jack Smith case and the Fannie Willis case. And that's without even having to talk about the New York fraud case where the judge just directed a default verdict against Donald Trump, despite every single listed bank that is a supposed victim of fraud testifying vociferously that they had not been defrauded and had in fact profited from their dealings with Donald Trump. Right? This is the New York fraud case is akin to, okay, you're on trial for murder, right? You're on trial for murder. This is the victim. Mr. Victim, please take the stand. Yes, Your Honor. And Mr. Victim gets up and takes the stand, and the prosecutor comes up and says, Mr. Victim, do you recognize Mr. Lowry over here? Do you recognize the accused here? And Mr. Victim says, yes, I do. It's Mr. Lowry. He does the Brushfire Mind Show. All right. On the evening of December 31st, 2023, did Mr. Lowry, in fact, murder you? And Mr. Victim says, no. Your Honor, I am relatively certain. Yep. I am relatively certain that I was not murdered. And the judge says, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Guilty. What? That's what happened in New York. That's what happened in New York. Mr. Victim took the stand and said, Your Honor, I was not murdered. And the judge said, got it. He's guilty. It's psychotic. It's the absolute eschewance of governmental legitimacy. We're in a very dangerous place, guys. But we can take some measure of optimism from these great big black holes that just got poked through all three of those cases, and hope that that is enough. So, it is Wednesday morning. Happy Hump Day. Thanks for joining us this morning. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow.